One of these days, I'm going to have a coffee shop.
That's what we wanted to create, was an environment where everyone was welcome and kind of an inclusive environment for everyone, and that
Council meeting for Monday, December 19th, 2011. And we'll start off by calling the meeting to order and asking Ms. Harrison if there's any lead items, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do not have any late items, but I believe that Councillor Bestwick may have one to add.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Worship, under number 18, I would like to add a notice of motion. And the topic is our in-camera council meeting time during our regular council meetings on alternating Mondays.
Okay, any other notice of motion? So if we could ask for an adoption of the agenda as amended, please. Motion. Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Move into the adoption of the minutes.
Moved as circulated.
4A and B as circulated. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Moving into presentations, and the first presentation, and actually the only one on schedule at this point, is Mr. Brian Clemens, Director of Finance, to give a PowerPoint presentation on the 2012-2016 financial plan. We're ready.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the first thing I'd like to say as we get into this plan is, so this will be essentially the same presentation that Council saw at their Finance and Policy Committee of the whole meeting last Monday night. And I'd like to say, for those people who are seeing it for the first time, that this is a draft plan, and it remains a draft until Council finally adopts it. Now, it's following on a plan that was adopted last year, so in essence, we're now in the second year of that plan. So the agenda tonight is to talk about the budget process, the status of the taxation increase. I'll give a little bit of background to what's in the budget. I'll talk a little bit about taxation, reserves and surplus, and debt, and then that will wrap it up. So I wanted to put, this is a slide that Council's seeing for the first time this year. I wanted to make it sort of clear to someone who was trying to understand how we put together a plan. I don't know why it's doing that. That there's a lot of inputs into the budget. It doesn't just come from one person or one group of people. There's a number of things that inform the putting together a budget. It's not prepared in isolation of all this other cities' planning processes. They, in fact, feed into creating one consolidated financial plan. So the process that we follow is that budgets are prepared by departments, by departmental staff. This is all sent to the finance staff for review and consolidation. It's reviewed at the senior management level. At that time, we determine whether any adjustments are needed to bring it within any criteria or guidelines that have been provided by Council. The city manager then reviews the higher service level requests that have come forward and makes some recommendations, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. The package is then assembled and presented to Council, and then there's a public consultation period and an opportunity for Council to deliberate and provide direction. And then we have the bylaw adoption. The timetable for this is that you received the budget officially last Monday night, so now the next couple of months will be review and discussion phase. We've scheduled a couple of special meetings to give Council some background on the budget. So there's a special Finance and Policy Committee of the whole meeting scheduled for January the 10th at 1:30 to 4:30. On January 16th, we're starting our regular Finance and Policy Committee of the whole meeting at 3 o'clock. And on January the 17th, there's another special meeting meeting has been scheduled for the afternoon, and all these meetings are open for the public to attend. It will be held in the boardroom at City Hall. Our tentative plans are to introduce the bylaw on January 23rd and to adopt the bylaw on February 13th. This is at Council's discretion, and we can do those on different days. If Council's ready earlier, we can bring the bylaws forward earlier. If Council wants more discussion, we can extend that a little bit. But once the bylaw has been adopted, then there's a bit of a break, and then in March and April we go back and we review the financial plan and then set tax rates. And basically what we're reviewing for it then is any new information we've had since this plan was put together, because don't forget, this plan, people started putting this plan together back in June and July of last year, so there's an awful lot has changed since then. We also don't get some key information until relatively early sort of late in the process, so early in 2012. So the final deadline on all of this is that by May the 15th, Council must have adopted a financial plan bylaw, and they must adopt a tax rates bylaw. So we'll go right into the status of the tax increase. So the overall property tax increase is 3%. And what that really means is that we're increasing the amount of taxation revenue that the city will get for its own purposes by 3%. Now, that changes a little bit between classes as a result of the Council's long-term policy to shift taxation from away from industrial and to increase the residential class slightly. So the 3% overall tax increase translates into a 4% increase for residential, 3% for most other classes, and a decrease of 20% for industrial. We also have a 5% increase in water rates and a 6.14% increase in garbage and recycling. And I don't usually get so precise as to get to 6.14%, but that translates into exactly $7 per household. And there's no changes in sewer rates for 2012. So what effect does that have on an average home? Well, we're using $350,000 assessment as an average property in Nanaimo. So a 4% increase, which applies only to the city portion of the tax bill, would be $71.41. The water rate increase would be on a home that uses an average amount of water would be $15.83. Now that's going to vary depending on how much water each individual household uses. And the garbage increase, as I said, it was $7, so it's about $94.24 per household. The impact on any individual house will depend a lot on how their assessment changes. If you have an average assessment change, it'll be that amount. If your assessment increase is higher than the average, your increase will be higher. If your assessment increase is lower than the average, then we'll have less of an increase. And it's too early in the process for us to provide people with much information about that. So the 5-year plan contains increases for each of the 5 years with, as we said, a 3% increase in 2012, and these are the blended or overall increases, 2.2% in 2013, 3% in 2014, 3.6% in 2015, and 3% in 2016. And the reason that the 2015 increase is a little higher than the other one is that's when we start to phase in staffing at the New Hyman Bay Fire Hall. So we mentioned the industrial tax shift. So Council's policy is to reduce the industrial tax rate to the same level as the commercial tax rate. This was originally planned to take place over 4 years, from 2009 to 2012. As a result of a significant drop in the commercial rate in 2010, that increased the gap and made it harder to achieve that goal within 4 years. So we've extended the program to 5 years. So the shift will now be completed in 2013. And just sort of as a graphic illustration of how that was, as you can see, the blue line is the industrial tax rate and the red line the commercial tax rate. So the industrial tax rate will be reduced by more than half over the 5-year period. So what did we tell you last year about this? As we said in 2012, there would be a 3.2% overall tax increase, and what it came in at is 3%. And you can see that the other years are relatively similar. Now, there are some changes. The 2013 one is down, and the 2014 one is up, and that's because we've delayed the start of the police building expansion for 1 year. It's been pushed 1 year further off into the future. In 2015, it's dropped quite a bit, and one of the reasons for that is we had a project in for the Chase River Dam spillway upgrade, and we've removed that project from the budget until we have a better idea of what exactly we're planning on doing. So we've actually taken that project right out of the budget for now. But it will probably be coming back in another form at some point in the future. So why did it come in? Why did it come in less than projected? Well, we've spent less money on higher service levels than we originally thought we were going to. We reduced the higher service level budget by $213,000. And then the next question, of course, would be, so why is there any increase at all? Why do we have to have a tax increase? Well, generally speaking, the amount of revenue that we get from growth, and I'll explain a little bit later how that's calculated, from new construction, covers roughly, and I'm being very rough here, it covers the cost of inflation and general cost increase in the budget. So what we are left with is there are some things that are increased service levels, money that we're spending in 2012 that we did not spend in 2011. So in 2012, we'll be adding 5 additional RCMP general duty officers and 2 police services support staff to the budget. That's going to cost $839,000, and that's about 1% of taxes right there. We have the 2 higher service level requests, which we'll talk about in a minute. There's money in to repay some short-term borrowing, which we're using as part of our project financing to build the new annex for the City Hall Annex. And we have some reduced revenues in casino revenues and in building inspections. And finally, there's $100,000 that wasn't in the budget previously for strategic planning that's been directed by Council. So one of the guiding principles of the budget preparation was 8 priorities that were previously established by Council. And so this next few slides talks about how this budget attempts to meet those priorities. Now, these priorities may ultimately get changed as Council goes through a strategic planning exercise and decides on new priorities, but these are the ones that were given to staff last year. So these are not in any specific order. So one of the priorities was to maintain a high standard of protective services, and this budget addresses that by hiring 24 additional RCMP officers and 10 municipal support staff over a 5-year period. It also contemplates the construction of a new fire hall on Hammond Bay Road, which is scheduled to open in 2015, with 24/7 staffing phased in over 3 years, as we did with Fire Hall number 4 in the South End. Another objective was to maintain civic infrastructure at current levels. So this budget contains adequate funding for current operations and maintenance. It contains a major renovation project at Cliff McNabb Arena. We are working through 2012 to develop asset management plans for infrastructure, facilities, and for parks, recreation, and culture. And one of the higher service levels we'll talk about is some seismic screening of civic buildings. So one of the overriding principles in this budget was to focus on maintenance of existing facilities as opposed to construction of new projects and facilities. Another council priority was to improve water supply systems to ensure an adequate supply of high-quality drinking water. So over the next decade, expenditures will increase substantially for water supply. In fact, I would say that that's one of the hallmarks of the 5-year plan, is you're going to see some significant expenditures on water supply. This includes a water treatment plant, increased storage at the Jump Creek Dam, replacing the number 1 reservoir, and this will all be funded through a number of sources, including borrowing, grants, reserves, development cost charges, and the annual 5% water rate increase. Another priority that was identified was to work with employee groups to continuously improve city services. And while that's hard to find specific line items that support that within the budget, we could say that staff are committed to ensuring continuous service and value improvements, that it's reflected in the staff's strategic priorities, and we're researching and developing some key performance measures to measure the effectiveness of city services. The council priority was to transition to more sustainable operations, including a focus on energy and productivity, and getting efficiencies in energy production where opportunities exist. So we have an energy manager that's partially funded through BC Hydro. We have a number of energy and greenhouse gas reduction projects planned over the 5-year period, about $800,000 over 5 years. And this project, this 5-year plan contains our first energy recovery project, which will be at the number 1 reservoir in 2014. Another priority was responsible growth management. Again, it's harder to sort of pin down what budget line items are represented here, but we do have a continued implementation of the OCP, and the budget does contain a neighborhood plan to be done annually. To partner with the province and nonprofit associations to reduce homelessness, well, the budget contains $165,000 annual contribution to the Housing Legacy Reserve, which provides funding for land acquisition, project capital costs, and development costs. and it spans a continuum of housing from emergency shelters to market affordable housing. So this could be used to fund such things as costs for on-site and off-site works and services, development cost charges, or surveys, subdivisions, or development approval fees, depending on what council is willing to approve. The final one is to support the Economic Development Commission, and this is a priority that's sort of been eclipsed by the fact that the commission has now been replaced with the Nanaimo Economic Development Corporation. And that will receive $1.375 million from the city for economic development and tourism, and that is contained in the budget. So just some rundowns on what is in the budget, and some of the major capital projects that will occur over the next 5 years is, as we've talked about, there will be a fire station number 6 constructed on Hammond Bay Road. Now that's the total capital cost of that is $2.7 million, and the $200,000 a year impact on taxes is to repay borrowing, because that is a project that will be funded through borrowing. There will also be, once that's constructed and fully staffed, there will be approximately a $2 million a year operating cost for that facility. The police building expansion, again scheduled for 2013 design and 2013 construction, 2014. It's estimated currently at $8.5 million. That's likely to change once we get more detailed design work done on that. Again, that's a project that we would anticipate borrowing for, so it'll require, like the fire station, will require some kind of either referendum or counter petition option. And it will be paid back in debt over 20 years. The annex construction will be completed in 2012. The total money funded from in 2012 will be $10.7 million. The impact on taxes is the repayment of the borrowing. Cliff McNabb Arena is another major project. The total cost in the budget currently is $1.6 million. So it only shows $1.3 million. We've started construction actually in 2011. And it will not impact taxes because it's being funded through reserves and hopefully through some grant funding. Maffeo Sutton Park is funded from payments in lieu of taxes, which is money that we receive from the Port of Nanaimo. The project needs some definition, so we're still not, we need some work done by Parks, Recreation and Culture to determine exactly what's going to be built on that site. We're looking at completing the Bowen and Corridorway Bridge and the expansion of the roadway there in 2012. And another major project coming over the next 4 years is a Boxwood Connector, which is funded through development cost charges. In the sewer fund, we've got a project in Beaufort Park to replace some old mains that go through peat and are sinking. In Jinglepot and East Wellington is another development cost charge project of $5.5 million. And of course, we've got the construction of the Green Lake Sewer, so that's $3.2 million that's funded from reserves in 2012. In water, we have some larger capital projects. So the Solaire subdivision, ACR stands for asbestos cement replacement. So we're replacing some water mains in Solaire. And there is definitely a typo in the second line of that one where it says $611 million. It's in fact $61.1 million for the water treatment plant. Unfortunately, I noticed that after I'd sent my presentation to Cam for putting on the screen tonight. Also, the number 1 reservoir, we talked about that needs to be rebuilt. The South Fork Dam is also funded from reserves. There's a duplicate supply main that's going to be new from number 1 reservoir to College Park, and the emergency water supply, which be scheduled for construction in 2016. Now, in addition to capital projects, there's an awful lot of ongoing expenditures, so that each one is maybe not as large, because those last ones basically summarize projects that were over $1 million. So there's a lot of ongoing programs. We're replacing fire apparatus, so there's 1 replacement truck in 2013, and 1 new truck will be required for the new fire hall. There's about $1.7 million in technology upgrades over the 5-year program. There's some work on the Bastion Parkade to deal with some moisture issues that they have. There's a number of projects on the pools and arenas and parks, so I'm not going to go into each individual one, but I just thought I'd show council and the community that there is an ongoing program for many aspects of the city's infrastructure, including sidewalks, street upgrades, road rehabs, drainage projects, and then water distribution capital of $22 million and some miscellaneous sanitary projects for $11 million. So that's a lot of money spent over a 5-year period. Now, council has all of this detail, or will have all of this detail in the yellow pages of your individual budget packages. and we can spend as much time reviewing it with council as you're interested in. So higher service level. So essentially, we prepare a budget at staff level on the assumption that we are not going to do anything in the upcoming year that we didn't do in the previous year. So we treat it as status quo. And if we're going to provide a new service, our intent then would be to have council approve it specifically through what we call a higher service level. So the department submitted approximately $1.6 million in higher service level requests for 2012, which represented 7 full-time equivalent positions. So the city manager is recommending 2 of these higher service level requests and just 1 of the staff. So one of the positions that's being recommended by the city manager is an internal auditor. Now, this would be an excluded position. It would be a person with financial training who is a specialist in the field, who would review controls and compliance with the city's policies to ensure that what we're doing is in compliance with our own policies. It could also perform performance audits, which would focus on efficiency and effectiveness of processes and programs. The cost of this position is about $150,000. That includes salaries, benefits, and the related office and administrative costs. So all overheads are included in that. As I said, it would be a management position. Exactly who it would report to is something that we would need to determine as we go along, but it would be at a relatively high level in the organization. An internal auditor would typically report either to like a general manager level or above. So for example, it would not be someone who operated out of my department. The other one that's being recommended to go forward is a seismic screening. So the intent is to screen 45 buildings out of the approximately 170 facilities that the city has in its inventory of buildings. The intent of this is to prioritize the building inventory based on seismic hazards for future study. And the results of this will form part of our asset management plans. Part of the reasons to do this is to ensure our occupational health and safety and our public safety responsibilities are being met. And our intent would be to perform this through an external consultant. Now, the things that didn't make the list are there's a communications manager that was requested. We put in a request for increasing the property acquisition budget. There's currently $600,000 a year that goes into the budget for council to use for property acquisition. That was put in at a time when $600,000 was equal to 1% of taxes. Now 1% of taxes is more than $800,000. So one of the things we thought council might like the flexibility to do is have more money in the budget, because property acquisition usually comes about at an opportune time. So there's not always time to accumulate money if an opportunity just comes up. But this is not currently recommended. An update of the parking bylaw, so that would be studies. The RCMP, in addition to the members that we're recommending, have also asked for 4 additional RCMP members, so 2 bike units, 1 plainclothes, 1 dog handler and dog, and a police services crime analyst. And through the Parks, Recreation and Culture Commission, the Symphony has asked for an increase in their grant. So the higher service levels are in council's budget package on their pink pages, and at one point during one of the meetings that we're going through, one of our Finance and Policy Committee of the whole meetings, we can go through each of those requests, and council can ask questions and potentially make alternate direction if that interests you. So moving on to taxation. I've given this presentation now I don't know how many times, and I always start with a very simple formula. So when determining how much taxes people pay, it's quite simple. It's your assessment times tax rates are equal to property taxes. And why this is important is because different agencies control different sides of that equation. So the assessment part of the equation is determined entirely by BC Assessment. The city has no input into how properties are assessed. Now, there are 9 different classes of properties, but only 3 of them have any substantial impact on the city's tax revenues, and you'll see a little bit of that later. The 3 that are highlighted there: residential, major industry, and business. So the other side of the equation is tax rates. So who gets to set tax rates? Well, the city does not set everybody's tax rates. We control about 60% of an average residential property tax. But the remaining taxes are set by the school district or by the province on behalf of the school district. The Regional District of Nanaimo, Regional District, the NRGH, the Vancouver Island Regional Library sends us a requisition, Municipal Finance Authority, and BC Assessment. So that's the other 40% of people's property tax bills comes from those, and they are not under direct control of the city. So just a little history. This includes the tax increases for the city only, the city portion of the bill, And these are the blended increases, so the overall increases. So in the last 10 years, there has been an increase every year, and it's ranged anywhere from 1.4% up to 6.5%. So people now are asking me, like, well, what does this mean for my house? Well, it's very difficult at this stage to estimate how anybody's individual properties will be affected. So we're saying an overall increase of 4% for your average residential property, but we can't tell you for any specific house what that's going to be. Most people will receive their assessment notices in the first week of January. It's important to look at your notice to make sure that it represents the fair value, market value of your house, and if it doesn't, you should be contacting BC Assessment, because that's going to be the only chance you're ever going to have to appeal your assessment in the next month after that. Also difficult for us is that we don't have information on other taxing agencies. We have some information from the regional district, but we have none from the school district or the hospital, BCA or MFA. Once we start getting some of this information, we will set up on our website a property tax estimator, so people will be able to log on to our website and look at they'll be able to enter their last year's assessment and the current year's assessment, and we'll give you an estimate of what your tax increase will be. And as we get more information, and we will update that to make the information as accurate as possible. So when we're talking about taxes, people usually ask, where do we rank in comparison to other municipalities? So the province of BC maintains a lot of statistics, and this particular one comes from their statistics, which includes property taxes and utilities. So some municipalities don't charge garbage, sewer, and water on a separate bill as the city does. So it makes more sense to add up all of those bills together to find out what your total cost of your municipal services are. So the other piece of methodology that they use is they use the average assessed home for each community. So it's not the average selling price of a home, it's the average assessment for a single-family home. In Nanaimo in 2011, the average assessment for a single-family home was $342,842. And and on that home, you would have paid $2,862 in property taxes. That VAR is variable rate, so taxes that are not parcel taxes. The total column includes your taxes and all of your water, sewer, and garbage bills in an average home. So compared to 27 municipalities who have a population between 25,000 and 200,000, with one being the highest and 27 being the lowest, Nanaimo was 20th on that list. And on this chart, I've shown us compared to municipalities that we typically compare ourselves to, who are similar size and sort of similar in composition. So, and you can see that we're actually all grouped just around the same level pretty much in terms of taxation. We're all ranked fairly similarly on the chart. Now, with commercial property taxes, it's a little bit more difficult to do the comparison. So I've actually used rates here. So Nanaimo is in the middle of the pack of this group, but you can see that we're above average compared to other BC cities. So that's not all municipalities, that's only city municipalities. And again, it's harder to compare. It doesn't necessarily mean the taxes are lower. It depends on assessments, which depend on more than the market value of the land and building. So properties in the commercial class are assessed differently than properties in residential class. So in the industrial tax class, you can see how we're moving along to achieve our goal of bringing our industrial tax rate down. So what this tells you is that compared to a number of other municipalities who have or recently had mills that are similar to Nanaimo Forest Products, we have one of the lowest property tax rates. And what those little arrows indicate is that Nanaimo and Port Alberni's rates in 2011 were down from the previous year, and the other three were up from the previous year, although I don't think any of them varied very much. But you can see that the tax rate paid by Nanaimo Forest Products and other mills in Nanaimo is considerably lower than what they would pay if they were in Port Alberni or North Cowichan. So in fact, we're at 67%, so we're 2/3 of the rate of cities and about 79% of all municipalities, so we're significantly below the average. The next couple of charts show where we get our money from. So when I talked to you earlier about the 9 different classes and the fact there's really only 3 that provide a lot of assessment to the city, this chart illustrates that perfectly. The dark blue part of the bar is the portion of the assessment base that is residential in Nanaimo. The purplish color is the commercial assessment base. And the red color is major industry, and you can only even see that just slightly on the Prince George chart. So you can see that for most municipalities, residential is by far the largest part of their assessment base, and the rest of it is largely made up through commercial. What's interesting is when you translate that into tax levy. So this is the same municipalities with the same bars. And it talks about what the tax levy is. Now you can see that little red bar that you couldn't even see on the last chart, which was assessments, has grown considerably, particularly in Prince George and Kamloops. You can see that they are getting a large portion of their property taxes from their industrial class, whereas Nanaimo gets a relatively small portion. The other interesting thing to look at is that Victoria receives more than half, or almost half, of its taxes from its commercial assessment base. Or if you could, just going back for a second, if you look, their commercial assessment base was actually a small part of their assessment base, but a fairly large portion of their taxes. So the way this looks, if you just look at Nanaimo, so for example in Nanaimo, the dark blue bar indicates that for residential, residential assessment is 85% of the assessment base in Nanaimo, and yet they pay 66.8% of the taxes. Major industry is less than 1% of the assessment. They pay 2.7% of the taxes. Business and light industry is 13% of the assessment. They pay 28% of the taxes. So who are the major taxpayers in Nanaimo? There's 3 malls, and the Nanaimo Forest Products, and BC Ferries. An interesting statistic is that a fairly small proportion of the taxpayers pay quite a large proportion of the taxes. Now, one of the things that was pointed out to me last year, which I think is a good point, is a lot of these are malls. So even though the malls Woodgrove Mall pay $3.9 million in taxes, there's a lot of little stores and smaller businesses that are paying those taxes and contributing to the tax base that way, even though they're not paying us directly. One thing we're generally talked to about is our tax ratios. And so for those who aren't familiar with what a tax ratio is basically it's taking the tax rate for a particular class and comparing it to the residential tax rate. So for example, in the upper right-hand corner of this chart, you can see the tax ratio for utility is 8. That means that the tax rate for utility was 8 times the residential tax rate. Where you most often hear about it is on the commercial ratio. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business every year calls councils to task for what their commercial tax ratios are. So in most cases, they're usually between 3 and 4%, probably, or 2.5 to 4%. So we're in about standard there. So I mentioned growth, which is a component of taxes. So we only get new revenue in the city when there is new assessment. And new assessment comes from an increase in inventory. So that means either through creation of land value through subdivision or through new construction. So the most critical part of this is the opposite of that. So general increases in market value do not generate more tax dollars. So if in 2013 everybody's assessment went up 50% in Nanaimo, we would not get 50% more taxes. It's not related to general market increases. What it's related to is where our new construction is built. And for Nanaimo, as we just saw, we get more revenue when new industrial property is constructed or created, or when new commercial property is created. And the number that we receive is difficult to assess at this time of year because we have not received our final information from BC Assessment. In 2011, we received about $1.4 million from new construction. The current budget contains $1.2 million per year. We're working with BC Assessment to refine that number. I suspect it'll go up a little bit, but it's not going to be huge. In other years, we've received more than that. In recession years, we've received even less. But right now, we're trying to be conservative at $1.2 million. So moving on to another topic, we talk about reserves and surpluses, and my subtitle here is why $99 million isn't really equal to $99 million. So what is a surplus? And the simple answer is a surplus is the amount by which revenue exceeds expenditures in a year. The city budgets for revenues and expenditures to be equal. Our budget is based on a balanced budget in which all of our revenues and expenditures are exactly the same. So if at the end of the year our revenues are up or our expenditures are down, we would have a surplus. And as I said, we do not budget for a surplus, we budget for a balanced budget. So if we don't budget for it, why do we have a surplus? There can be a number of reasons, and one of those can be unexpected revenue, which hasn't happened lately, but it has happened a few years. It could be a grant we don't anticipate, or some new revenue sources that the province has passed on to us. Where it often occurs is where revenues exceed budgets, and again, not so much lately, but we've had years where investments exceeded their budgets or fees came in larger than they were expected to. It's more common that our surpluses are caused by expenditures being under budget, so people not spending everything that's in their budget. And the major source of that is usually vacant positions, because the city's practice is to budget for 100% of all salaries. So if somebody leaves their position during the year and that position stays vacant for 2 or 3 months, that creates, obviously not paying that salary, so that creates a bit of a surplus. Now, budgeting tends to be conservative because legally we can't have a deficit, so everybody is conscious to try and stay within their budget. And we don't get any surplus from capital because we use any excess in capital to carry forward to complete other capital projects, so it relatively rarely creates a surplus. So we do have a surplus. What do we do with it? Well, generally it goes into a reserve. Here's an example of some of the reserves we've used in the last few years. It's gone into property purchases, general capital, uninsured claims to cover us in case we ever get a claim that isn't covered by the MIA. Uncollected taxes, in case there ever comes a case where we can't collect taxes, the right of tax sale. We use it for property tax reduction. So I know some people say, well, if you have a reserve, why don't you just pour the whole thing in and reduce our taxes to nothing? Well, in fact, the 2012 budget contains $22 million from surplus as funding sources for various projects. So we are returning the reserves back into building things and reducing taxation. There's also a requirement from time to time to fund employment-related liabilities. So the $99 million I was talking about earlier, so our estimated balance for the end of the year is $99 million. Of that, $27 million is in development cost charges. Now that money can only be used to fund development cost charge projects, so projects that were included in the development cost charge bylaws that we created several years ago. There's about $16 million in statutory reserves, and what this money is money that's earmarked for specific kinds of projects. There's $31 million in water and sewer, which can only be used for water and sewer projects, and many of them are being funneled back into water and sewer projects, which leaves about just under $25 million of more discretionary funding. So the reserves we're expecting will have $2.3 million in priority capital, which, if I remember correctly, is largely being used to fund the annex construction. We have an uncollected taxes reserve. We have a housing legacy reserve, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which goes to use to fund projects in the housing legacy program. We have money to fund our computer and software expenditures. We have about $1.6 million in property reserves. We have some money left over in a storm drain reserve, which will be used over the next 5 years to fund a storm drain project. And there's some smaller reserves that are less than $1 million that add up to about 10. Now, one of the things that we'll do for council over the next few months is that we'll provide council with a briefing that describes all of our reserves and the balances and what those funds can be used for. We've done that in the past. I think it's quite a useful exercise for council to see how the reserves got created and what they're earmarked for. So the kinds of things that we've used for them in the past is that we've used them as part of our funding sources for Neck Point Park, the Aquatic Centre, the purchase of Lindley Valley, funding the Oliver Woods Community Centre, Harbourfront Parkade when we built that, Bevan Pool retrofit, the Port of Nanaimo Centre, and the annex replacements. So reserves have been used largely for large capital projects. Usually at this time of the year we're asked about debt and debt servicing and how that's represented in the budget. So at the beginning of this year, there was $38 million in outstanding debt, of which the majority was related to the Port of Nanaimo Centre. We borrowed $30 million a few years ago. There's still $26.3 million outstanding. The next largest outstanding debt is for the Nanaimo Aquatic Centre. And then there's $3.4 million for the fire hall that was built in 2008. And then there's $1.3 million for water, and that's a slice that will probably grow over the next 5 years. So outstanding debt per capita, so what does that mean? So you can see over a long period of time that the debt started to taper off. We borrowed money in 2000 for the Aquatic Centre, and in 2006 and 7 for the Port of Nanaimo Centre. So that's when the debt per capita was increased. But even at that rate, we're still at a lower debt per capita than we were in 1997 or 98. as a percentage of our operating expenditure, sorry, as a percent of our total expenditures, both operating and capital, we're at about just under 3%. So out of curiosity, how does that compare to other municipalities? It's a little bit harder to get information for other municipalities, but this group of municipalities is similar in size and construction to the city of Nanaimo. The average of this group of municipalities is a per capita debt of $722,000 in 2010, and we're at about $450,000, so we're slightly less than average. And it's hard to say exactly why that is. I think that one of the things you can say is that municipalities have made different choices about debt over time. So some of them have chosen to borrow to pay back their expenditure, some of them have chosen to do pay-as-you-go. So the last thing I just wanted to mention is I said I would talk about the balanced scorecard. So this is an initiative that we're working on in the finance department to provide a set of, the definition is a carefully selected set of quantifiable measures derived from an organization strategy. So what we've done is we've developed a number of measures that reflect how the organization is run, and it looks through a number of different filters. So we'll talk about a customer filter, a social perspective, a financial perspective, an employee perspective, service and program delivery, and environmental. So the returning councillors won't have seen this, but the councillors who were the returning councillors will have seen this all last year. It'll be new to some of the new council members. So over the next few months, we're hoping to roll out this scorecard, and it'll contain about 50 different performance measures. So there's 10 social measures, for example, and 10 financial measures, and 6 customer measures, and 11 service and program delivery measures. And this is sort of a way of looking at the budget that isn't strictly numbers driven or isn't strictly financially driven. It's an attempt to try and show how budgets are achieving corporate objectives. So, and this is something that can be fine-tuned again as council goes through their strategic planning exercises. So that's it, Your Worship. If people were interested in more detailed information about the budget, there is, I believe it's now posted online, and you can get budget questions answered on the budget forum, which is up and running.
Great, thank you very much. We do have some questions. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Brian. I just have a couple of questions. I won't get into a great amount of detail, knowing that we'll have a lot of time to work on this over the next several weeks. So this budget, as you mentioned, is the capital budget in particular, is based on our 2010 strategic priorities, those 8 priorities that we established in 2010.
That's one of the inputs that goes into the budget, yes.
And as you mentioned in one of your later slides, that we'll be having new priorities set with our strategic planning exercise that's well underway that may in fact change or alter some of the prioritization and direction. And we'll have that opportunity to do that in the new year.
This budget does not need to be adopted until May, so there will be an opportunity to refine the budget. Some of these projects have been in the budget for some time and will have been undergone. I mean, some of these projects will be approved and moving forward, but there will be time to amend the budget and to adjust it. It's a 5-year plan, so we're always working on the next 5 years as well.
Thank you. Next question, Your Worship. The Beaufort Park sewer improvement. That number that you indicated there doesn't come from reserves, which all of the other sewer improvements come from the reserve. I was just curious as to why the Beaufort Park sewer improvements doesn't.
Sorry, all other than 100,000 comes from reserve, and I don't know exactly why that 100,000 is not coming from reserve, but we can research that and get that to you.
Thank you. And this is my final question, Your Worship, is just as it related to the Nanaimo Ice Center. I thought that I saw that there was some capital improvements to the Nanaimo Ice Center, flooring and potentially a sign and other humidifier, I think, but other improvements. And I don't see that in the yellow pages that you made reference to on page 108. So I'm I see that the Cliff McNabb improvements are in there at the amount of the $1,277,000. I just don't see the new ice center improvements, and I think they're relatively significant dollar value attached to those improvements. I just don't see that on our yellow pages for 2012.
Oh, I'm not sure about the answer to that one off the top of my head, but I will we'll look into that and let you know.
Thank you.
I think the most important answer is that they're in future years. 2012, yeah, there's nothing in 2012. That's why you don't see it in 2012. It's for the future years in the latter 4 years of the 5-year plan.
So there's no identified improvements for the new ice center for 2012?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, just one quick question from me on that. Can you just tell me what the contractual arrangement is now with the RCMP per officer? What amount is? I think it's around 125, but I just thought 140. Is it now 140?
140. About 145, Your Worship.
145. Okay. Went up as we sit here. Okay, I see. Oh, Councillor Kipp, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship.
Oh, go ahead.
A comment, because I didn't want the public to think that every RCMP officer makes $145,000. The $145,000 is the all-in cost that includes everything: the dogs, the uniforms, the cars, the office space, and it's an all-in cost. It's just worked out on how much it costs per member, but each member doesn't make that.
No, a good point, and I should have clarified that. Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
Yeah, that's bullets and tasers. Right? Yeah, thank you. The priorities for 2010, we're going to update them. I appreciate that, and I really like the fact that we're looking to maintain infrastructure because we're falling behind. The number one reservoir energy project has been on the books for a while. I'm glad to see that's coming. What's the size? Are we reducing the size of the water reservoir with this plan? I'll save that question then, because originally we talked about reducing the 15 million liters or gallons in there and putting it down to a 2 million gallon reservoir, and I'm wondering if that's still a plan. That question can come after.
Yeah, well, that definitely is correct, because that's a very large reservoir, too large to cover. It needs to be, we need to have a covered and closed reservoir now with the water filtration, because you can't filter the water and then leave it exposed to the elements for things like birds to do their business in. So it's going to be covered, and it is going to be smaller.
Okay, thank you. Neighborhood plans, we've completed one a year for 10 years, maybe? Is that it?
I don't think we've done one a year for 10 years, but we've done one a year for the last 2.
The last couple of years we've done. Perfect, thank you. What is our total budget? And how do I derive 1% of the budget? Because I see that our budget's around 150 to 160 million, but we always say that 1% of budget is 800,000.
Sorry, no, Your Worship, we say 1% of property taxes is around 800,000.
Oh, 800,000. Okay.
So the property tax levy is around $80 million, roughly.
Okay, thank you. That clarified that.
Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question through you to Mr. Clemens. Mr. Clemens, on the revenue side, how do you determine how much revenue we would gain from Casino Source?
Your Worship, we would essentially what we do is we look at history. So, and we tend to budget for what we received in the previous year, and over the last few years, that's been declining by a couple $100,000 a year. At one time, we received more than $3 million. Now we're down to I think it's $2.5 million in the budget.
There is, however, a fixed formula. They pay us a certain percentage of what is generated out of the Nanaimo Casino. So it depends on the success or relative success of the Nanaimo Casino. When they're making more money, the city gets more.
It's more money. Good, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I see no further questions from council. So we'll move now into item 6, delegations pertaining to agenda items. And thank you, Mr. Clements. That was a very good presentation. Yeah, sorry. Move and second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Sorry. Thank you. Now into delegations pertaining to the agenda items. And we have the first delegation is Jess Anderson. Welcome, sir. You have up to 10 minutes. We just need your name, address, and your interest in the project here. It's to do with the 2012-2016 financial plan.
My name is Jess Anderson. Pardon?
Nope, just you go
I
ahead.
don't have to lead? All right. My name is Jess Anderson. I'm presenting a proposal to council towards the budget. I discovered listening to this conversation that it's a little more important than I thought to present some of this information to mayor, council, and guests here. I guess basically what I need to point out is that council's money to work with is based on taxation and utilities and so on and so forth. The effect on limited income people in your community is rather dramatic. I myself pay $750 a month to my residential landlord. An increase of $100 in utilities and associated costs means I don't eat every month. Okay? And I'm already living in a rooming house. The average cost on my street of a rooming house is $600 plus utilities. A lot of people are rooming double, triple people in a single room on their welfare rates. So increases are of dramatic importance to people that don't have a way to increase their income at present. All right? So given that fact and the reality that a lot of people in this community are on fixed incomes through pensions or rentals to other people, or just the fact that they're government employees of one level or another who are going into contract negotiations in the coming year, and I don't think anyone is realistically expecting that any of them will get a wage increase in these days of provide more service for the same staff or fewer. So because of those factors and the fact that you only have 26,000 residential homes plus, and most of it is tax monies in one form or another that pay the people that are in them, any increase has a large effect on the community and its livability for people. So I got involved in the Occupy protest because they were concerned about housing and so forth, and it affects me. I went through things from my past when I had money to give away, which I did at the University of Lethbridge, which is up on the screen, and I believe copies were sent to council this morning. Basically, I took $4,500, put it in an account at the University of Lethbridge, and set the requirements. Interest minus inflation is all they could spend. Next screen, please. $4,500 was put in. They've had 12 recipients of between $150 and $350 a year out of it for a total of some $2,200. The current balance is $5,300. That's copied on the screen there. Next screen, please. The endowment report is current as of this month. Basically, I've given out half of the original amount, and it still has more. And all I did was put it in a bank account and say interest less inflation. So I looked at that, and I thought one of the biggest expenses that the city has is how to keep your staff paid and not have to do increases. So funding like this could be applied to the lowest paid salary in each department or by lotto or whatever, or to any other purpose within the city that needs funding, where you go to people and you say, give us $1 a week voluntarily to put into a fund. Interest, less inflation, and use that to pay one salary. So you can get the same service, keep the staff, but now it's not paid out of your general revenues, it's a permanent thing. My belief is that something like that could be applied to a lot of different things, whether it be the school system using it to pay for a teacher's aide they're losing, or the secretary in your office not having to double up on somebody else's work because you've had to reduce staff to control your costs. The public needs to have people doing the work in the parks or at the swimming pools or the lifeguards and so forth, so the same kind of fund can be applied to that. It doesn't have to be all at once. It can be put on as a voluntary thing on the property tax assessment form, one line saying, I would like $1 of my property tax to go to X purpose. Basically, that was my idea towards keeping the costs down. I would point out that the Occupy Nanaimo group researched on ways to increase the amount of money coming into the city by finding companies that build micro-housing and convincing them that a place to renovate those stainless steel containers here in town and then marketing them elsewhere. There are 2 companies on Vancouver Island that are willing to give away microhouses. We're currently researching 4 to be brought into the community to place on perhaps private lands of people that are in the property tax arrears already. Might like within your bylaws and that to have a house, micro-house at the back of the property that gains some income so they can keep current. These are things that would have to be discussed with City Council and your specialist on what would be entailed and so forth, but I think it's an opportunity to be looked at. Those are just 2 of the examples. I'm hoping you'd give consideration to those, and that's why I brought the endowment report to show you that it's real. The companies that are doing the microhomes are Ziglu out of Victoria, Red 7, which is out of Houston, Texas, which is involved in the Portman Bridge project. There's a company in Burnaby. There's one that even does high-level eco-housing, which is absolutely everything eco-conscious you can think of in a stainless steel container, 10 by 10, 10 by 20, or 10 by 40 for $37,000. They ship all over the Pacific Rim. So those are things that came out through Occupy. There's other ideas like that out there that should go through the various committees and experts that the city has. I'd like information on how to bring that forward. I'm hoping setting up a funding arrangement like that might keep everybody's costs down to affordable. I want to thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Appreciate you coming to the podium with this information for us. I would have a comment on the micro homes and micro housing, in so much as there's a local company here known as 12 Cube on the corner of Bowen and Meredith that has a very interesting model that I think has considerable asset and value in future micro builds, as you mentioned. I would have a question to staff relative to the theory of the endowment composition that Mr. Anderson has presented. In theory, is that a practice that is something that a municipality could consider to undertake for wages and benefits? Or is that just a theory of endowment that may not apply to municipal governance? Mr. Anderson, it was to staff, but if you'd like to answer.
Mr. Kenny, did you have a question on that?
Well, perhaps I don't fully understand what the delegation is suggesting, but from what I interpreted, it sounds like he's hoping that residents or otherwise would donate money to the city to set up as an endowment fund. And a number of municipalities have worked on foundations over the years, and some successfully, some not. So one of the challenges with a taxing jurisdiction like the city of Nanaimo is that it's very difficult to get people to donate to the city of Nanaimo when they say they pay taxes already. So it's a little different with the university. There's a little more positive appeal to donations, same with hospitals, but it's very challenging for municipalities to solicit donations.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson, did you want to respond?
Okay, he's right in that the university is a little bit different. However, I point out that you have an online payment thing, and one of the things I suggested was that a line be added on your property tax assessment saying, I'd like $1 to go to X of 4 different accounts. So you're not doing anything separately, you're just allocating $1 out of each assessment towards a particular salary. Okay. The other thing to mention is that as far as online donations go, there's a company called Mobile.com, which the university has just started to use for general endowments towards their faculty and programs. That started just this month, and that is available to anybody to use as long as they're incorporated or unincorporated.
Thank you.
The city is definitely incorporated.
Thank you.
Okay, we have more questions, sir. Councillor Johnstone.
A quick one through you to Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, I didn't realize you were looking at donations particular, but a few years ago, 10 years ago, our previous chair of Parks and Rec brought forward a suggestion of $2 per capita to be put towards cultural programs and cultural grants in the city. Was that something you were thinking of? Which has been very successful.
Yeah, very similar to that. I think if you approach people and said, "Hi, I'd like to permanently pay a city staff so I don't have to come back for an increase later for them," I think you could sell that.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. I see no other questions. Thank you very much. Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now, is there anyone else that would like to speak to matters related to the 2012-2016 financial plan? Mr. Taylor. Welcome, sir.
Fred Taylor of 204 Emery Way. Council has looked at this twice now. I, as a taxpayer, am anxiously awaiting for some direction of council to go for 0 increases or minus increases, and you've got a very capable staff that can come back and give you some suggestions without turning out the lights. Today you've got some bylaws that are part of this budget. Water 5%, garbage 6.14%. And they're together generating $385,198. What's wrong with that little bit out of the reserves? You got $90 million. What's wrong with that out of the year-end surplus? Last year, 2010, you had $2.7 million. Yeah, $2.7 million, and you just dumped it into reserves you'd already dumped into the beginning of the year. And you're going to have 2011, maybe some surplus, and you're worried about raising our water rates and garbage rates for $385,000? Like, come on. Next one, please. Water, it's $332.40. Garbage, $121. It's $453.40. For many a year, we've told the public there's 3,000 to 4,000 undetected illegal sweets. That's an average of, say, 3,500. You take 3,500 times 453, that's $1,586,000. Where you divide it there, it's 4 times of what you're wanting for this. And each suite is generating what to somebody about $5,000 a year, and we're not getting a lousy $400 for our services. Other taxpayers are paying the way. They're freeloading. How long is it going to take us to find these suites to help pay so we don't get our taxes raised, or water rates or whatever raised? Like, the list could go on. What are we doing in business licenses or whatever to ensure that everybody's paying? It's just, I think it could be an easier job than making sure everybody's paying for their dog licenses. But you only need a quarter of what the freeloaders could pay without raising my water or my sewer. for 4 years in a row. So I think there's lots of ideas out there to hold the line on raising and put the initiative to everybody pays their fair share. And we look at what we're buying and what we're doing with the reserves, everything like this. I think there's lots of opportunity out there to save raising user fees or anything else. And I've just tried to present an example. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Your Worship, I had a couple comments on that. One is that with regard to Mr. Taylor's comments, I think that's a really good point about the secondary suites and Council's policy that they should pay. Staff have been following up, and we believe that of those 3,000 to 4,000 suites that are out there, at least 2,300 of them have already been identified and are paying the double user rates. So I think we are making progress and adding to the number every year, because finance staff do identify them through ads in the newspaper, and as well, complaints about secondary suites are followed up on. In all those cases, we do charge a double user fee. And Mr. Taylor also made the comment that instead of increasing the user rates, we could just draw down from the reserves. But the problem with that is that we've identified that the reserves are too small to fund the existing water capital projects that are already planned. So the objective of the water rate increase is to actually build the reserves, because we know that the water treatment plant, for example, is going to cost over $60 million, and the reserves are not sufficient. There's borrowing as well required, but the increase of user rates are required to reduce the amount of borrowing so that these facilities can be more affordable to the public in the future.
Mr. Chairman, if I could respond, please. Why are we not doing something about the 2,300 suites then, if that's the figure?
Well, I think Mr. Kenny indicated that we are trying to do the best we can. We've recovered a number of them now.
I believe when I asked the question, there's 3,000 to 4,000 possible out there. That means, in my opinion, unidentified. Now, we can talk about reserves, and you need it for different projects, yes. But when you come at the end of the year, this has got what you want to allocate according to staff for reserves. You come to the end of the year and you say you got 2.7 left over. Then you get from staff, well, let's dump it into the annex project. Let's dunk it into this. As extra, it's extra funds at the end of the year. So, in my opinion, instead of dumping it into, again, more into some of these reserve accounts, give us a credit, give us it back. And here's a good example. You don't need to raise the water and sewer because you had $22.7 million left over last year that you just, again, added to reserves. You had the money in there, what you listened to staff of what to put in at the beginning of the year for the reserve account. Why are you listening to dump some more in? Baffles me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Is there anyone else now that would like to speak to matters related to the 2012-2016 financial plan? And seeing none, we'll move down into... okay, this is to do with the 2012-2016 financial plan. Welcome. We just need your name and address for the file.
Oh, sure. My name is Matthew O'Donnell. I just have a couple of questions. You'll have to excuse me, this is the first time that I saw the explanation of the budget and whatnot. I just have a couple of questions. I guess I'll start, I don't know if this is a question I have to direct to the city, but in reduced building revenue, $177,000. How much of that was like has to do with maybe the conference center, maybe lost expected revenue in rental or anything like that?
Your Worship, none of it has. This revenue relates to building permit fees and reflects the fact that there's less building construction activity in the community this year than there was last year.
Okay. Now, for the total tax increases that are being proposed on the city and whatnot, what would that what would the percentage translate into actual dollar amount? Like, how much additional revenue does the city have to raise with the tax increases?
Tax increase of 3% is about $2.4 million.
$2.4 million? Okay, thank you. My next question, I guess, would be, what is our actual cost for debt again? I know it was covered in the presentation, but what's the city's debt right now? Like total debt?
Who's going to do that? Mr. Clemens, do you want to?
The total debt is about $38 million.
$38 million? Okay, thanks. Now, my next question is the $3.1 million that's been set aside for Maffeo Sutton Park. Beautiful park, by the way. I really like that park, especially after the Olympics came. You know, the renovations done were awesome. Where exactly, what's that $3.1 million actually going to be used to help improve Maffeo Sutton Park even further? During your presentation, it kind of seemed like there wasn't an actual, like a concrete plan in place, but I was just wondering if there's any ideas or anything as to where that $3.1 million is going to go?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a plan of it, probably at Parks and Rec would have that information available, and you could get it from there at Bevan Park. They would have a proposed plan and how the expenditure is taking place. Councillor Johnson, do you want to add on that?
Yes, Your Worship. There will be more discussion going on over this next year to determine how we're going to phase in the rest of the renovations. It was to be a 3-year phase, and there's more discussion going into the accessibility buildings, the washrooms and placement of those facilities, and possible amphitheater, changing the playground to a different location. I think it's going to remain the same now, but there's going to be public input coming into that, so you'll have an opportunity to come forward and give your input.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, I guess my really quick questions, just looking at the numbers here, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm a layman, and I'm sure there's a lot more educated people out here who can figure out these numbers better than me, but if this tax increase is going to result in $2.4 million in extra revenue that's going to be needed in order to do what we have to do, maybe we could take a little bit of money out of that Maffeo Sutton fund, which is $3.1 million, just to maybe cover the tax increases. I know I'm just speaking on behalf of myself, but Maffeo Sutton Park's a beautiful park, and it does sound like there's some great ideas being discussed as to how to improve the park even further, but maybe until a more concrete plan is created, maybe council could consider taking some of that $3.1 million and that covering the tax increases, and then just as again just a layman, so I'm not really that educated in this, but I mean, if we have a $99 million in reserves for a variety of reasons and whatnot, there's a lot of variables there, and $38 million in debt. I mean, if I lived at my house and I had enough money to pay off my debt, then I'd probably just do it, especially if I have money left over, and then kind of use that as a reserve afterwards. I mean, 38 million, 99 million in reserve. I mean, you still have over $50 million in reserve, and that would solve pay off our debt. I guess just as a regular person, I don't really see the need in paying extra interest on stuff that we have the money to pay off anyway. And then I know I'm kind of bumbling all over the place, but going back to the Maffeo Sutton thing, I mean, $3.1 million, if we only need to raise $2.4 million, then, we'd still have a little bit of money to put back into Maffeo Sutton to improve it even further, but we'd also wouldn't really need a tax increase. It'd kind of be redundant, so.
Yeah, I might just remind you, though, that the tax increase now, we're looking at possibly 4%, but the final determination won't be made until the middle of May. So it might be, Matt, that we're going to be able to see a possible reduction at that point, too. But your points are well taken. Councillor Kipp, did you have something you're going to ask?
Just on Maffeo Sutton, because the previous council canceled the land that the condominiums would have sat on with the hotel deal, that the whole park has to be relooked at now. One of the reasons the band shelter and the playground was moved because of the location of the proposed condominiums. So that has changed, so the park plan will change with that, because that land will go back into park use. Further, the money that's allocated in there, I believe, came from some of the legacy funds from the Olympics, and it's
Your Worship, just further to that, all that $3.1 million isn't sitting in the bank. It's a dedication of a present and future revenue stream of payments in lieu of taxes from the Port Authority.
Yeah, so it's not sitting there. It's money that's promised.
We don't physically
a
have
portion
that money
of it is there now, but the full $3.1 million isn't. I think maybe it's probably valuable for me to comment on the comment about why don't we pay down the debt, because I think that's a question that the public would ask too. And there's a couple answers to that. One is that, as Mr. Clemens noted in his presentation, not all of that $99 million is available. Most of it, by far the majority of it, is dedicated for specific purposes. For example, development cost charges is a big part of that, and that's money paid in by the development community and can only be spent on projects to support the development industry. So it's not as though it is available for paying down the debt. Likewise, virtually all the money in reserves is dedicated for a specific purpose, some long-term capital purpose. The other factor is that when the city enters into debt contracts, it does that through the Municipal Finance Authority, and normally they're 10-year term. So payment opportunities come up every 10 years, but don't come up every year. And in return for making a long-term commitment like that, the city gets very, very favorable rates. So it's one of the downsides of a 10-year contract is that you don't have the flexibility, but one of the upsides is you get a very, very low rate.
So like sometimes we basically just have to pay off the interest, so it's in the lender's interest to lend out the money to the city? Like it would work in any other type of...
Well, absolutely. Every agreement requires two willing partners, somebody to borrow the money and somebody to lend it.
Absolutely.
Okay, I see no further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Second, all those in favor? Now, is there anyone else who would like to speak to matters related to the 2012-2016 financial plan? And seeing none, we're going to move into staff reports over page on 11A. Appointment of Building Inspection Manager. Staff's recommendation that Council appoint Mr. Dale C. Lindsay as the manager of Building Inspection section in the Community Safety and Development Division of the City of Nanaimo to administer the BC Building Code, BCBC, as amended or reenacted from time to time, and the requirements set out in the Building Bylaw 2003 number 5693 as amended or replaced.
Move staff's recommendation.
Move staff recommendation. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. I see no discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item B, UBCM Seniors Housing and Support Initiative. Staff recommendation that Council endorse the City's grant application to the UBCM 2012 Age-Friendly Community Planning and Project Grants, or the Senior Housing and Support Initiatives, SHSI, for the development of a program addressing social isolation in seniors newly arrived in the community.
Move staff.
Okay, second. And discussion, Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question to staff. We do several of these on an annual basis, and we just saw in our budget presentation about $165,000 for social housing. And I'm just curious, do we receive reports back from these agencies on how the dollars are, when they're allocated, how they're utilized? Do we get such information back from the various agencies on how and where they spent their monies?
Yes, Your Worship. This is a grant application to a UBCM grant program. If we're successful in receiving the grant from UBCM, then we would undertake the study and then prepare a report back to Council of the findings of that study.
And follow up, so when we provide funds to agencies, do we receive any feedback from, I understand what this is. I understand this is a grant. It's going to cost us $10,500 to do the study. So when we receive more than a report or a study, and we receive monies, do we receive information back on how those monies are
This would be money coming to the city for city staff to undertake the study or to hire a consultant to undertake the study.
But Your Worship, let me have a try at this one, because I think Councillor Bestwick is asking a little bit different question. So when people make these grant applications, they normally present a package of financial information, which includes their financial statements and their budgets and their reports usually on the previous year, which is likely included a grant from the city. So at the time they make application, they have to present all of the financial information to support it.
Thank you. So we would have that available to us when we're making the application?
I believe in virtually all of the cases that's correct. Certainly there's a lot of grants through Parks and Rec and the grants in aid and the cultural grants and the social grants. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Brennan, do you have a point? You're on.
No, I just wanted to confirm that my reading of this was correct, and that is that this is the city's grant application, and the city is going to work in partnership with another community organization, but in fact, it is the city who's driving this. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move into Corporate Services 2012 AVICC resolutions. Staff recommendation of the Council: 1, identify any topics on which Council wishes staff to draft resolutions, and 2, direct staff to present such resolutions at the 2012 January 09 Council meeting for consideration of adoption and submission to the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities for consideration in their 2012 annual general meeting. Okay, move in second. I see no discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to item D, Strategic Planning Steering Committee. Staff recommendation that Council establish a Strategic Planning Steering Committee with a mandate and objectives as set out in Appendix A of the staff report. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 2012 Local Government Leadership Academy Elected Officials Training Seminar. Staff recommendation that Council approve the attendance by Council members of the Local Government Leadership Academy Elected Officials Training Seminars, including registration fees, travel, food, and lodging within Council policy. Move staff recommendation. Seconder. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The information items, someone like to move them? Moved. Seconder. All those in favor? Any business arising? I don't see any questions that on the park trail and stairs at town site. We'll move into reconsideration of bylaws to be moved by Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. 13A, that Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2011 number 7004.06 to amend Schedules A and B for water rates be adopted.
Seconder. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
13B, that Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2011 number 7099.02 to amend water rates for 2012 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And 13C, that Municipal Solid Waste Collection...
Excuse me, Your Worship. Can I just confirm? Councillor Kipp was opposed to the last bylaw. Thank you.
Were you opposed to the last one? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see your hand there. I apologize for that.
Moving on, 13C, that Municipal Solid Waste Collection Amendment Bylaw 2011, number 7128.01, to amend Schedule A for solid waste collection rates for 2012 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Kipp opposed. Balanced councillor in favor. The motion passes. Introduction of bylaws. There's none, actually, so we'll skip down to item 16, correspondence. We have 16A. Maybe if somebody would like to move the correspondence, and then we'll come back. Second. All those in favor? Business arising on A. Does anyone have any concerns about the letter from our MP, Jim Crowder? Councillor Brennan.
I would like to move that we request that the mayor ask the federal write a letter to the federal government asking the government to respect municipal autonomy in trade negotiations with the European Union, to inform us, the City of Nanaimo, about how CETA policies will affect our rights, and ask them to adopt a negotiating position that supports reciprocity.
Okay, are you moved and seconded? Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We'll move into item... Okay, anything on B that anyone has? And failing that, we'll move into C, and go ahead, Councillor Kipp.
Your Worship, I'd like to send a letter through in support. We do have a cosmetic pesticide bylaw ourselves. Went through a process in the last council for this, so I believe it would be good to endorse something that we endorse. One of the original concepts of the pesticide bylaw, one of the biggest pushes was to have a provincial standard, and I think that's where this is heading. Instead of each municipality being different, they're trying to establish a standard for pesticide bylaws in BC, so I think we should send a letter of support, and that would be my request.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Moved and seconded. Just on discussion, I was going to say that they did send us a very nice letter saying they were very impressed with the bylaw that we had passed and asked for a copy of it, which we'll certainly oblige them with. So, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving into... Yes, sorry?
B, and I didn't get an opportunity because I was still shuffling back to the front of the agenda. I would move that the City of Nanaimo advise Ms. Natalia Riznik, Communications Officer for CETA, that the City of Nanaimo would be pleased to participate in the launch of the International Development Week, and that we would like to have a display of the full-size cutout images of real-life beneficiaries in the developing world.
Which I think will be at the Parks and Rec location. So I was hoping someone was going to move that, but thank you for bringing that back.
I understand that staff is already scouting places in the city where they'll get the most passers-by.
Seconded? Yeah, it's been moved by Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Kipp. No further discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And we've dealt with all three pieces. Item 17A, council appointments, and the 17A appointments of council. I think I had another page on this thing in here.
Right here, Your Worship. Your Worship, it's on the attached.
Oh, yeah. The Mayor's recommendation regarding council appointments. One, that council amend the terms of reference for the Plan Nanaimo Advisory Committee, PNAC, to increase the number of council members from 2 to 3. That council amend the terms of reference for the Social Planning Advisory Committee, SPAC, to increase the number of council members from 1 to 2. And 3, that council amend the terms of the reference for the Safer Nanaimo Working Group to increase the number of council members from 2 to 3, and that 4, that council confirm the 2012 council appointments as presented.
Your Worship, I would like to suggest we do these seriatim.
Okay, let's do that. So we'll start off with item 1, that council amend the terms in reference of the Plan Nanaimo Advisory Committee, PNAC, to increase the number of council members from 2 to 3.
So moved.
Seconder? Moved and seconded. Councillor Brennan, did you have... No? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Number 2, that council amend the terms of reference for the Social Planning Advisory Committee, or SPAC, to increase the number of council members from 1 to 2. Moved. Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Number 3, that council amend the terms of reference for the Safer Nanaimo Working Group to increase the number of council members from 2 to 3. Move and second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And then we'll go into 4, that council confirm the 2012 council appointments as presented. Move and second. For discussion, Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you, Worship. I would so recommend an amendment, Your Worship, that we refer this 2012 council appointments back to council's purview in a broader session of all council members present with the mayor to discuss the respective appointments to the respective committees, commissions, and external bodies.
Okay, is there a seconder for that?
I'll second the motion for the staff.
Okay. Any discussion on that one? Councillor Kipp and then Councillor Brennan.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Council's aware that I've had some concerns with the process that we've arrived at, or how we've arrived at some of our appointments. I've been somewhat disappointed that I find it very subjective and criteria are not objective. We've already had some concerns with a different number of appointments from different people. I love what we got in what we recorded today in our financial stuff. The one statement that really caught me as I've been thinking about this, a balanced scorecard. A carefully selected set of quantifiable measures derived from an organization's strategy. And why I relate to that is that I believe our committee structure, which has continued on council after council with a few changes, I know back in the 90s to put social planning in.
Order, Your Worship, a motion to refer is not a debatable motion. It's debatable only on the point of the adequate place for the referral. The substance and merit of the motion are not debatable, only on where it's being referred.
Okay.
That's my understanding of the rules, and perhaps our parliamentarian can...
If Councillor Brennan
you want to make a decision on that one for us?
Well, could I explain my position then of why I was headed to referral?
Well, if it is a referral,
it's been made. The motion's been made. Now it's on the propriety of where it's going.
Okay, so that's what I want to know. Is it going to an open meeting? Is it going to an information session? How are we doing this?
I don't. You have to ask whoever moved it. It's Councillor Bestwick. That's your motion.
Yes, Your Worship. Yes, Your Worship. The appointments as presented something that I would recommend that we either then defeat this motion and then bring a secondary motion to take this back to an FP Cal meeting, or that we have specially scheduled that Mr. Clemens has identified for our budgeting and our strategic planning, because this forms part of our ability to strategic plan. This forms part of the committee appointments. There's 23 appointments, none of which we have had the opportunity to speak to collectively in the same room. And I believe that's absolutely imperative for the next 3 years that we as a council do that.
Ms. Harrison, I'm still waiting for your answer, and the question to you was, on a motion to refer, is it debatable? These are yes or no questions.
Yes, the motion is debatable on the motion to refer, so the merits of the referral specifically.
Okay, Councillor Brennan, did you have a point?
Yes, well,
Your Worship, so why was my point? I was debating my reasons for sending it back.
Well, I was trying to get an answer earlier from staff on it, but I didn't get it in time. I'm sorry.
it's on the motion to refer, on the advisability of referral, not on the substance or merit of the motion itself. And in my view, and that's why I made the objection, I thought that the speaker was speaking to the merits of the appointments here and how they were made, not to whether this should be referred. And I think that the motion, the debate has to be constrained simply to whether it is advisable to refer this or not.
Okay.
Your Worship, we were just instructed by our legislative staff member that the amended motion is debatable on the referral.
Okay, well, let's get something from Mr. Kenny, where are we at this?
And if I misunderstood that, I'd like to be corrected.
Your Worship, the motion on the floor at this time is the motion to refer. the appointments to a session of council. So the discussion should revolve specifically on the motion to refer.
Okay. So I think we're all familiar with that thing. So on the motion, Councillor Bestwick's motion to refer, all those in favor? Opposed? We have, so opposed will be Councillor Bestwick, Councillor Kipp, and Councillor McKay. Bounce it.
No, Your Worship. We were in favor of referral. The rest of you were opposed to the referral, but you're on the prevailing side. Thank you.
Okay. You've got the recorded so that the balance of the councillor that opposed would be Mayor Rattan. We'll have Councillor Anderson, Councillor Brennan, and Councillor Greaves and Councillor Johnston. Is that, if I'm correct on that? So the motion, you're correct, Councillor Kipp, thank you, is defeated. Okay, we'll go on the original motion that the council confirm the 2012 council appointments as presented. Moved and seconded. Is there a second on that one? I think it was already seconded once before, but in any event, we'll have those. So on the motion now, is there further discussion on it?
Yes, I would like to debate it about the process.
You're on, Councillor Kipp.
Am I allowed to debate this? As I said, the balanced scorecard, that's why I thought it should be referred, because it wasn't a balanced nor a quantifiable process we went through. Many of the appointments were done and then redone. People went through a process of asking for their favorite ones, and some got accommodated, some didn't. How I relate this balanced scorecard thing to this is the whole committee structure should be based on our organizational strategy. We're dating our budget on a 2010 set of strategies. I think it's dynamically changed in our world currently for the finances and how things are going to change dynamically that comes to us. In fact, we passed CETA motions and things today to talk about the European Union not taking over our businesses. So from my perspective, I'm disappointed with the process that we arrived at. They were subjective, based on people's wishes and wants. I heard they were based on knowledge of a position. And I'm really disappointed that it happened this way, especially with the fact that in the last council, I worked very hard on a motion so that the committee's appointments wouldn't end during silly season or the election. It always looked to me in previous years that the committees would end at the end of the summer in the election year and become very much non-functioning. They wouldn't, I mean, the meetings didn't even happen sometimes. They closed the committees off until the next council was elected. So there'd be almost a stall period of 5 or 6 months on our advisory committees, which I think is a little, I don't know, a bit degrading to the people who are giving their time in that, because it stopped what their value of input into the community. So by extending that date that the committees wouldn't run out until April was to give the new councils time after an election to really sit down and look at vision and mission and set the priorities of the council, establish policies, and establish committees that reflect the work that the community's council wants to do. With the information from the last election, restructuring our committees, like we could even possibly use a communications committee and putting our word out with the mayor as the spokesperson, those things. So how this came about with its political process behind closed doors, many of the things are on telephone conversations, a bunch of lobbying, really disappointed me personally. In my second round, when I got mad and said I want certain things, I kind of got what I wanted, which kind of confused me a bit too, because then it showed me that the process was somewhat flawed, very subjective. So I'd like to go back and sit with this council in a meeting or in an information session, talk about what we want, try and establish if the current vision of the city is the one we want, because there's a written vision statement, and then hash out or pass out those committees. And I would love to see if people rotated through them. Like one of our highly paid consultants, Mr. Cuff, said that no one should become a bailiwick in one of these. It shouldn't become a certain councillor's committee. They're advisory committees to council. So therefore, I can't vote in favor of the selection process and how it sits in there. Further to that, I'm stated as being on PNAC here, and I wasn't aware that I was going to be in PNAC. And I don't think I can fulfill the mandate of all those committees that I've been selected to now, so like to see if we could change that after. But thank you, that's my point.
Hey, Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I understand it, all of this council is entitled to one vote, but one of the special privileges that is delegated to the mayor of our city is the fact that he does assign committees and advisory bodies to council. And I believe that he has spent countless hours and given due thought and consideration to these appointments. And I support him wholeheartedly in the direction he's given council. Thank you.
Councillor Beswick.
Thank you, Worship. Well, as a council and at the mayor's purview upon collating all the information that these decisions are based on and made with, I think it's important that when we make team decisions that are going to impact each and every member of the team of 9, that we would do that collaboratively, together, collectively, and establish some terms of reference for our own particular preferences and how they would best serve and best suit our serving this community on those respective committees, and have our own input in a collective form as opposed to one-on-one siloed sessions. So my suggestion is that we take this back as a group. We do this when we ask for people to submit to applications in the newspaper to form parts of advisory committees. We will sit as a group of 9. We will have 3 to countless numbers of applicants for various committees, including SPAC and PNAC and Parks and Rec and other ones. And we will, as a council, decide who is our members at large from the community. So we do that together. This, to me, is no different when we're selecting committees and commissions that we sit on and we serve the community, that we do it collectively as a council, not individually as a councillor. And that is my point, and why I would like us to take this back to that, and to embody all of us in a room to make these appointments.
Okay, Councillor Brennan.
Well, I have confidence in the mayor and the committee appointments that he's suggested, and I'm prepared to support this roster of committee appointments. I think the committee appointments are a very difficult job. I think there's a balance of experience, and interest, ability, and suitability. And if we pursue perfection, then I think we do that at the expense of good enough. And I think that the unmistakable message that we got from the electorate in the election a month ago was that they want council. They want this council to get on with the work of the council, with the business of the city of Nanaimo. And I have confidence that this roster of committee appointments is good enough. It is good enough overall to do that, to pursue the business of the city of Nanaimo. And I think that we need to get on with that. And I think this is the first step in doing that.
Okay, Councillor Reeves.
Thank you, Your Worship. This process is subjective, and I don't think you can make it an objective process. It's very difficult. So many variables. We were asked to choose our 5 picks, if you want to call it that. So 5 picks, 8 or 9 people, that's 45 variables, first, second, third, fourth pick. Very difficult process. I went through that process. Selected my 5 committees from 1 to 5. I really haven't looked to see where I ended up on the list, or I think I have 6 or so committees. Some I didn't ask to be on. I didn't discuss it with the mayor, and I got what I got. And I'm going to do the best job I can, and I'm going to support the mayor in his decisions in the committee selections.
Okay, question on the motion. All those in favor Opposed? We have Councillors Kipp, Beswick, and McKay opposed. In favor, we have Mayor Rattan, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Brennan, and Councillor Greaves. Do you agree? Thank you. We'll move into the item 18, notice of motion. Councillor Beswick.
Thank you, Your Worship, that the in-camera council meetings on the regular scheduled meetings of council be considered for PM versus AM hours.
Okay, do you have a more specific than that?
No, I don't.
Okay, so that's fine. It's going to be the notice motion for that. Will come up on Ms. Harris on the next.
That will come forward on the January 9th council agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're moving into delegations pertaining to items not on the agenda, and we have up to 10 minutes. Mr. Gord Fuller. Welcome, sir.
Gord Fuller, 604 Nichols Street. Honorable Mayor and Council, when looked at in comparison to the overall budget for Nanaimo of $160,370,000, current salaries for Mayor and Council only equate to 0.18%, and the proposed increase in salary this year would simply equate to 0.015%. One could say that of more concern should be Nanaimo's growing debt load and the over $2.5 million we will be paying in interest on that debt in 2012. This, however, is about Mayor and Council wage increases. While the wage increase in monetary terms and looked at as a percent of the overall budget is not a significant burden, it is still a burden on the taxpayer. When one looks at the possible 4% tax increase to homeowners, as well as a 5% water and 6.14% garbage tax increases, adding the wage increase could be seen as adding insult to injury. Looked at in comparison to the wages earned by the citizens of Nanaimo, city councillors are already making more than 45% of those citizens, and those 6 councillors receiving RDN salaries are making more than 60%. The mayor, currently earning $79,000 and in the top 19% of wage earners, will, over the 3-year life of these 8% yearly increases, be earning over $100,000, ultimately moving into the top 4% of wage earners. I don't want to get into a huge debate about City Council's position being part-time. The reality is, based on information from City staff's report of September 14th, councillors are currently required to attend an average of 106 meetings per year. If one looks at these meetings taking an average of 3 hours, council commitment is 6 hours per week. Yes, many will put in additional hours, some more than others, but the reality is this is a part-time position. I would encourage Mayor and Council too, if there really is a need for a raise at all, go back to basing council and mayor raises in pay on cost of living. I hazard to guess that even this will be higher than what will be proposed to city workers when negotiating their contracts, and it definitely will be higher than most citizens will see if they see a raise at all. While constantly striving to reach a median of comparable cities, councils will continue to see that median increase and will continually, in striving to meet that median, be asking for exorbitant wage increases. To stop this from happening, I would encourage council at the next Union of BC Municipalities meeting to put forward a motion that increase of city council salaries across the province be limited to cost of living increases. Thank you.
Okay, sir. I see no questions. Thank you very much. Now we'll move into item 21, question period. These are agenda items only. Welcome, sir.
Ron 13165 King Richard Drive, and I am perplexed about the discussion, recent discussion on council appointments. If I remember my community charter correctly, appointments that are made to committees and commissions are to be set by council. As a council.
And they were. The mayor made a recommendation, which is our policy, and then tonight...
Sorry, but it sounds like there wasn't a meeting, a council meeting at which that issue...
This is
everybody
tonight.
was there and they all voted on that in that meeting?
Well, we do have Councillor Pachi away on holidays tonight.
No, I don't mean tonight. I mean when this, when these appointments were set up. I don't understand why we were here tonight doing this if there wasn't a council meeting prior at which these matters were, from the council as a whole, cleared before it got to this meeting. That's my point. I don't know if I think I'm correct.
Mr. Kenny, do you have a comment, Mr. Kenny, on that?
This is set by council.
Yes, they're set by council. The mayor made a recommendation tonight, and council approved the recommendations here tonight, and it's at an open meeting done in front of your very eyes.
Point of order. Point of order. Standing committees of council, section 141. The mayor must establish standing committees. Select committees, a council may establish and appoint a select committee to consider the matter. So there's a difference between standing committees and select committees. Section 141 is standing committees, local government action. Section 142 is select committees of council. So there is a difference on how they're established.
Okay.
I'll send that to the mayor and council. Right?
But your worship, these are select committees and appointments to external board appointments. They're not standing committees.
Yeah.
No, they're select.
Okay, I just found it, usually people seem to come to some conclusion before you come to this meeting, and to hear the kind of discussion that I heard tonight I found disturbing. And disturbing not because of the individuals involved or whatever was said, but because of what seems to be a procedural problem, that those issues should have been cleared before we got here. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak to matters related to agenda items only? Welcome.
Hello again, Matthew O'Donnell. I have a question. I'm kind of kicking a dead horse, but I have to ask this again.
As long as it's on the agenda.
Absolutely. Okay. It concerns the 2012 budget again. Based off a question I just heard or a statement, we're paying $2.8 million in interest payments on our outstanding debt. I did hear the explanation from the city manager here about, what exactly entails that $99 million in reserve, but I have to go back to $38 million that we have outstanding for debt, $99 million in reserve, whatever it's set aside for or whatever, and $2.8 million being thrown out the window just to pay interest payments. So I guess my question would be, whether it's to city or whether it's to council, how much are we actually putting towards paying off this debt in the 2012 budget? And is it enough? Because as far as I'm concerned, as a citizen, I think we have enough money to at least settle a debt or pay a substantial amount down. Maybe we can make that $2.8 million in interest that we're wasting $1 million or something to that effect. So I guess, again, my question would be, how much are we paying this year to pay off this debt?
Ms. King, go ahead.
I think the important percentage is that 2.8% of the city's operating and capital expenditures are going towards debt service. So
I'm not very educated, so could you put that into a dollar amount?
I can't, but perhaps Mr. Clinton. Pardon me? Approximately $5 million. And I think, but the important thing is, I think, is that if you look at a household and you compare us to a household, I think most households would think they were in pretty good financial shape to pay less than 3% of their budget towards debt amortization. And I think that it reflects prudent management of the city over many years to have a relatively low debt that's affordable with only 3% of your revenues going to debt service. I think most governments would be very envious of that.
I also think that most city households, if they had the opportunity to pay off their debt, would. And as a incorporated city or a government or whatnot, if we have the means to pay off that debt, I really believe that should be the number one priority, especially if we have finances left over to be able to take care of other projects that are also set aside.
Hey, Matt, I've got a question for you.
Oh, sure, sorry.
Councillor Brennan.
I just wanted to clarify with staff for you. When you say that the money in reserves is earmarked for something, do you mean statutorily? Do you mean by law we can't spend that money to pay off the debt?
Much of it, that's correct. Your Worship, much of it, that's correct. For example, the money in the development cost charge reserves cannot be used to pay off debt for things like pools and conference centers. Money in the water fund and the sewer fund cannot be used to pay off debt for other purposes. So the majority of the funds are committed by statute to other purposes. There are some of the monies, around 26 million, I think was the number from the finance director, that is available by council to reallocate. But council could reallocate it, but not without implications, because council set that money aside in those reserves for very good purposes. Council could look at everyone, and I think Mr. Clemens committed that he would provide you with that information. But I think when you look at it, you may make decisions to reallocate it, but those decisions will be made in taking into account the previous reasons why they were allocated, and in most cases, I suspect Council will concur. So no, the monies aren't available just to take and spend on something else. Further, as I said before, the money, you can't pay off debt unless you have the opportunity in the contract to do that, and most of this debt is under 10-year contracts, and so it can only be paid up when the contract comes open.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Now, is there anyone else who would like to speak to matters related to the agenda? If you want to come down, sir, we'll see you next. Mr. Taylor's first, and then we'll go ahead.
Fred Taylor, 204. Did we not borrow from reserve accounts like the sewer account and that to help out in the conference center?
I'm not sure. Mr. Go ahead.
Yes, some funds were borrowed from the sewer fund to fund the capital cost of this. However, they do have to be paid back.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, I'm Jess Anderson again. Regarding some of the things that I proposed, you have a number of different committees, a number of different processes that we, the general public, are not familiar with who or how to approach you on some of these proposals. So I'm wondering if I can get a list of what committee would deal with, say, if we come up with a property that could be used to advance tourism money potential for the city. Who and how would we go to you? I'm wondering, with the recent legal case with Occupy Nanaimo, if the city is getting the transcripts of it, or is there a process where those two groups could get together? Because I believe communication between interested citizens and council is very important. And
okay, this is the budget. We're dealing with the budget tonight, sir, okay?
Yes. Okay, now on the budget...
That court case is not involved in tonight's discussion on the budget.
Okay.
Or any agenda item, if it's on the agenda.
Okay. Budget-wise, if we have a proposal that the city could use to make money to reduce what you have to take out of taxpayers' pocket, who and how would we approach?
The best thing would be to contact the city. They're going to be open from 8:30 to 4, and maybe, Mr. Kenny, do you want to maybe elaborate a little more on that?
Well, the council acts as a committee of the whole in dealing with finance issues as the Finance and General Finance and Policy Committee, which meets on opposite Mondays to these meetings, so we can provide a schedule of Finance and General Policy Committee meetings, and that was where I would think it'd be appropriate to make recommendations about spending in the budget.
Okay. Would it be possible to have that emailed or picked up tonight?
I don't know if we'd be able to get out tonight for you, but we certainly will be able to email it tomorrow during the business hours.
Okay.
We can provide that information to Mr. Anderson.
Do you have it right now?
We can email it. We have his email address. Okay. So we can provide a list of meetings.
So this is how fast it goes.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, is there anyone else who would like to speak to matters related to the agenda only tonight on question period?
Port Fuller, 604 Nickel Street. I'm wondering what the rationale is on increasing the number of councillors on PNAC, SPAC, and the SAFER committees.
I think some of it was based on what we perceived, or I perceived, if you wish, to be the workload. Some of them had fairly large committees, some around 20, and we had only one representative on council on it. And we felt, in the case where there was a large group, we felt that maybe more than one councillor would better represent the city's interest.
So, yeah, it doesn't really make that much sense. I mean, actually reducing the number of councillors on committee